Hey, Shelly. Sorry it's so late. I wanted to make sure that I got back to you, though. I would hate to miss this chance to continue our conversation on Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. And in your video on Monday, you mentioned some really interesting things, being about a third of the way into the book, and your overall reaction was the spooky, the haunting feel that the world that Bradbury developed create it caused you to have a reaction to it, and a stronger reaction than you normally would expect to have, and that you don't really read spooky books. I don't either. That's not usually my type of thing. But I definitely agree that the world Bradbury creates here is kind of chilling because apart from being a world that envisions no books for beyond the protagonist's career as a fireman and the change of firemen from putting out fires to creating fires to burn books. We also see a loss of a lot of the other pillars of our society that lead to thought, lead to interactions, not just social interactions, because we see that going away a lot too in there, but also interactions with meaningful topics and ideas, the types of things that the great thinkers have thought about for many, many decades, centuries, millennia, even. And I think that's what really gives it that creepy vibe is that Bradbury does such a good job of painting this world where all of those have gone to the wayside and they've been replaced by something that gives instant gratification. And we see very early in the book some interactions with our protagonist Guy and Clarice McClellan, and she has a very naive almost personality, being a very youthful person. She interacts with Guy and teaches him to pay attention to things like the stars in the sky and the feel of rain on the tongue and all of those simplicities, and sitting around just talking to the family rather than just plugging into the entertainment that's at hand, that's getting pushed on everyone. And that's a lot of what drives the momentum forward are those early interactions, because we have a world in where everyone's expected to just follow the status quo of what is told to you. This is how you should be. This is what you should value. We see that our protagonist Guy, they've just recently put in a third TV wall, essentially, in the house, in their living room. So you can turn in three different directions in there, and you've got your program surrounding you in almost a 3D type of imagining. If you look to your left, you have a different view than if you're looking at the one on your right. And his wife wants to put in a fourth one to complete the immersion. And we find out that this is about a third of his annual salary to put in one of those. And they just put in that third wall a couple months ago. And we see it not just with his wife, but with others, and the interactions and little subtle things that Bradbury drops in there. There's a scene very early in part two where he's traveling and on public transportation, and there's a advertisement jingle almost of sorts that's playing. It's a long thing, and it's repetitious and really drives home what they want you to sell, and it gets caught in his head, and you get the picture of everybody else kind of tapping their toe along to it or bobbing their head in time with what's being said, and you get that kind of mindless mentality, and you see a society where when you get mad, when you get frustrated, when you feel emotion, you're encouraged to go out and drive 100 miles an hour down the street, and to go run over a rabbit or kick a dog, and things like that. And so you have your base violent outlet outputs. So instead of thinking about things, you're encouraged to just go and lash out at something. And so we see a society that's also built upon a lot of crime and terror that doesn't get directly dealt with, but it's very much hinted at in the background there. That's absolutely a very scary reality to consider, and to think of how a loss of something such as literature could lead to that. And so I really loved hearing your thoughts on it. And I think that hopefully by now you've finished the book. I know you were planning on finishing it this week. And so I'd love to hear your overall thoughts, and how things progressed from part one, where we have a lot of that world building and the initial changes of Guy, and things going into part two, where he has yet another encounter with somebody that has a big impact, and the ramifications that follow after that. And then part three, where we have the climax of the action and the resolution of all of that, and how it all comes together at the end, with some memorable fireside chats, and the interesting contrast there of it being a fire that is there to give warmth and to bring people about it, rather than a fire that is designed to burn things down. And so almost a step back to the way things used to be. And so I really, really enjoyed that, and have enjoyed revisiting this book. I'm thrilled as can be to have had this be our inaugural Eclectic Book Club pick. And I know that the next pick is going to be really, really enjoyable too, in a very, very different way, because we're going to be reading the Iliad by Homer. And you mentioned in your video that you believe that I'm an expert on this. I will vehemently deny that. I've read the Iliad and the Odyssey exactly once, and both of those were about 20 years ago. As crazy as it is to say that, back in younger years, I read them both, not for school or any kind of a project like that, but because I was genuinely interested in it, and enjoyed them both, and have been meaning to revisit them for a long time. And now I have my opportunity thanks to you. So while I have a familiarity with the overarching story, as I imagine a lot of us will, I don't know the finer details of it, but I'm excited to get to that point where I do know them a little bit better. So hopefully we can both become experts together over the next 2 months with Homer's works, and whatever translation folks choose. Again, I'll be choosing the Fagles translation, but I strongly encourage you to sample a variety of them, and pick up the one that resonates the best with you. If you want in on these conversations, so those of you that are not Shelly, that are listening in on our little conversation here, hit us up on Voxer. Either one of us, we can add you to the group, even if you're not planning on reading the Iliad or the Odyssey with us, but you want to kind of be in there to listen to the conversation in the chatter. You're welcome to be that fly on the wall and chime in as you have thoughts, even if you can't read along with them. But Shelly, I wanted to get back to Fahrenheit 451 to bring this to a close. I wanted to read a chunk of this that takes place in part one, towards the end of part one. And so we've had a couple of tumultuous scenes for Guy, between Clarice and then an older woman who he encounters during his work. I don't want to spoil anything that happens there, but if you haven't read this and are planning on reading it, there's a potential that there are some mild spoilers for things that will happen for this conversation. But we open the scene up towards the end of a conversation that Guy is having with his wife. He is not feeling well the day after meeting this older lady, and then his boss is going to come by, and that's really the meat of where these interactions are taking place, but I didn't want to skip this very quotable part that comes at the very end of his conversation with his wife. So in my version, this is page 55 where we start. Montag is talking to kick this off. Last night I thought about all the kerosene I've used in the past 10 years. And I thought about books. And for the first time I realized that a man was behind each one of those books. A man had to think them up. A man had to take a long time to put them down on paper. And I'd never even thought that before. He got out of bed. It took some man a lifetime to maybe put some of his own thoughts down, looking around at the world and life. And then I come along in 2 minutes and boom, it's all over. Let me alone, said Mildred. I didn't do anything. Let you alone, that's all very well. But how can I leave myself alone? We need to not to be let alone. We need to really be bothered once in a while. How long is it since you were really bothered about something important, about something real? And then he shut up, for he remembered last week and the two white stones staring up at the ceiling, the pump snake, and the probing eye, and the two soap-faced men with cigarettes moving in their mouths when they talked. But that was another Mildred. That was a Mildred so deep inside this one, and so bothered, really bothered, that the two women had never met. He turned away. Mildred said, Well, now you've done it. Out front of the house. Look who's there. I don't care. There's a Phoenix car just drove up and a man in a black shirt and an orange snake stitched on his arm coming up the front walk. Captain Beatty, he said. Captain Beatty. Montag did not move, but stood looking into the cold whiteness of the wall immediately before him. Go let him in, will you? Tell him I'm sick. Tell him yourself. She ran a few steps this way, a few steps that, and stopped, eyes wide, when the front door speaker called her name softly, softly. Mrs. Montag, Mrs. Montag, someone here, someone here. Mrs. Montag, Mrs. Montag, someone's here. Fading. Montag made sure the book was well hidden behind the pillow, climbed slowly back into bed, arranged the covers over his knees and across his chest, half sitting, and after a while Mildred moved and went out of the room, and Captain Beatty strolled in, his hands in his pockets. Shut the relatives up, said Beatty, looking around at everything except Montag and his wife. This time Mildred ran. The yammering voices stopped yelling in the parlor. Captain Beatty sat down in the most comfortable chair with a peaceful look on his ruddy face. He took time to prepare and light his brass pipe and puff in a great cloud of smoke. Just thought I'd come by and see how the sick man is. How do you guess? Beatty smiled his smile, which showed the candy pinkness of his gums and the tiny candy whiteness of his teeth. I've seen it all. You were going to call off for a night. Montag sat in bed. Well, said Beatty, take the night off. He examined the eternal matchbox, the lid which said guaranteed 1 million lights in this igniter, and began to strike the chemical match abstractedly. Blow out, strike, blow out, strike, speak a few words, blow out. He looked at the flame. He blew. He looked at the smoke. When will you be well? Tomorrow, the next day maybe. First of the week? Beatty puffed his pipe. Every fireman, sooner or later, hits this. They only need understanding, to know how the wheels run. Need to know the history of our profession. They don't feed it to the rookies like they used to. Damn shame. Puff. Only fire chiefs remember it now. Puff. I'll let you in on it. Mildred fidgeted. Beatty took a full minute to settle himself in and think back for what he wanted to say. When did it all start, you ask, this job of ours? How did it come about? Where? When? Well, I'd say it really got started about this thing called the Civil War, even though our rule book claims it was founded earlier. The fact is we didn't get along well until photography came into its own. Then, motion pictures in the early 20th century. Radio, television, things began to have masts. Montag sat in bed, not moving. And because they had masts, they became simpler, said Beatty. Once, books appealed to a few people here, there, everywhere. They could afford to be different. The world was roomy, but then the world got full of eyes and elbows and mouths. Double, triple, quadruple population. Films and radios, magazines. Books leveled down to a sort of past-putting norm. Do you follow me? I think so. Beatty peered at the smoke pattern he had put out in the air. Picture it. 19th century man with his horses, dogs, carts, slow motion. Then in the 20th century, speed up your camera. Books cut shorter, condensations, digests, tabloids. Everything boils down to the gag, the snap ending. Snap ending, Mildred nodded. Classics cut to fit 15-minute radio shows, then cut again to fill a 2-minute book column, winding up at last as a 10 or 12-line dictionary resume. I exaggerate, of course. The dictionaries were for reference, but many were those who sold knowledge of Hamlet. You know the title, certainly, Montag. It is probably only a faint rumor of a title to you, Mrs. Montag. Whose sole knowledge, as I say, of Hamlet was a 1-page digest in a book that claimed, "Now at last you can read all the classics, keep up with your neighbors." Do you see it? Out of the nursery into the college and back into the nursery. There's your intellectual pattern for the past 5 centuries or more. Mildred rose and began to move around the room, picking things up and putting them down. Beatty ignored her and continued. "Speed up the film, Montag, quick. Click, pick, look, eye, now, flick, here, there, swift, pace, up, down, in, out, why, how, who, what, where, bang, smack, wallop, bing, bong, boom. Digests. Politics? 1 column, 2 sentences, a headline. Then, in midair, all vanishes. Whirl man's mind around so fast under the pumping hands of publishers, exploiters, broadcasters, and the centrifuge flings off all unnecessary, time-wasting thought." Mildred smoothed the bedclothes. Montag felt his heart jump and jump again as she patted his pillow. Right now she was pulling at his shoulder to try to get him to move so she could take the pillow out and fit it nicely and put it back. And perhaps cry out and stare, or simply reach down her hand and say, "What's this?" and hold up the hidden book with touching innocence. School is shortened, discipline relaxed, philosophies, histories, languages dropped. English and spelling gradually neglected. Finally, almost completely ignored. Life is immediate. The job counts. Pleasure lies all about after work. Why learn anything save pressing buttons, pulling switches, fitting nuts and bolts? "Let me fix you pillows," said Mildred. "No," whispered Montag. "The zipper displaces the button and a man lacks just that much time to think while dressing at dawn. A philosophical hour, and thus a melancholy hour." Mildred said, "Here, get away," said Montag. "Life becomes one big pratfall, Montag. Everything, bang, boff, and wow." "Wow," said Mildred, yanking at the pillow. "For God's sake, let me be!" cried Montag passionately. Beatty opened his eyes wide. Mildred's hand had frozen behind the pillow. Her fingers were tracing the book's outline, and as the shape became familiar, her face looked surprised and then stunned. Her mouth opened to ask a question. "Empty the theater, save for clowns, and furnish the rooms with glass walls and pretty colors running up and down the walls like confetti or blood or sherry or Santerre. You like baseball, don't you, Montag? Baseball's a fine game." Now Beatty was almost invisible, a voice somewhere behind a screen of smoke. "What's this?" asked Mildred, almost with delight. Montag heaved back against her arms. "What's this here?" "Sit down," Montag shouted. She jumped away, her hands empty. "We're talking." Beatty went on as if nothing had happened. "You like bowling, don't you, Montag?" "Bowling, yes. And golf?" "Golf's a fine game." "Basketball?" "A fine game." "Billiards, pool, football?" "Fine games, all of them." "More sports for everyone. Group spirit. Fun and you don't have to think, eh? Organize and super organize, super sports. More cartoons and books. More pictures. The mind drinks less and less. Impatience. Highways full of crowds going somewhere. Nowhere. The gasoline refugee. Towns turn into motels. People in nomadic surges from place to place, following the moon tides. Living tonight in the room where you slept this noon and I the night before." Mildred went out of the room and slammed the door. The parlor aunts began to laugh at the parlor uncles. "Now let's take up the minorities in our civilization, shall we? Bigger the population, the more minorities. Don't step on the toes of the dog lovers, the cat lovers, doctors, lawyers, merchants, chiefs, Mormons, Baptists, Unitarians, second-generation Chinese, Swedes, Italians, Germans, Texans, Brooklynites, Irishmen, people from Oregon or Mexico. The people in this book, this play, this TV serial are not meant to represent any actual painters, cartographers, mechanics anywhere. The bigger your market, Montag, the less you handle controversy. Remember that. All the minor minorities with their navels to be kept clean. Authors, full of evil thoughts. Lock up your typewriters." They did. Magazines became a nice blend of vanilla tapioca. Books so damned snobbish, critics said, were dishwater. No wonder books stopped selling, critics said, but the public, knowing what it wanted, spinning happily, let the comic books survive. And three-dimensional sex magazines, of course. There you have it, Montag. It didn't come from the government down. There was no dictum, no declaration, no censorship to start with. No. Technology, mass exploitation, and minority pressure carried the trick. Thank God. Today, thanks to them, you can stay happy all the time. You are allowed to read comics, the good old confessions, or trade journals. Yes, but what about the firemen then? Asked Montag. Ah, Beatty leaned forward in the faint mist of the smoke from his pipe. What more easily explained than natural? With school turning out more runners, jumpers, racers, tinkerers, grabbers, snatchers, flyers, and swimmers instead of examiners, critics, knowers, and imaginative creators, the word intellectual, of course, became a swear word it deserved to be. You always dread the unfamiliar. Surely you remember the boy in your own school class who was exceptionally bright, did most of the reciting and answering while the others sat like so many leaden idols, hating him? And wasn't it this bright boy you selected for beatings and tortures after hours? Of course it was. We must all be alike. Not everyone born free and equal, as the Constitution says, but everyone made equal. Each man in the image of every other. Then all are happy, for there are no mountains to make them cower, to judge themselves against. So, a book is a loaded gun in the house next door. Burn it. Take the shot from the weapon. Breach man's mind. Who knows who might be the target of the well-read man? Me? I won't stomach them for a minute. And so when the houses were finally fireproofed completely all over the world, you were correct in your assumption the other night, there was no longer a need of the firemen for the old purposes. They were given the new job as custodians of our peace of mind, the focus of our understandable and rightful dread of being inferior, official censors, judges, and executors. Thank you, Montag. And that's me. Haunting, isn't it? And I'll just leave it at that. I really enjoyed it. Some really, really chilling thoughts that Bradbury stokes there and uses that to really fan the flames of the book and what carries on from there. And I look forward to hearing in full just what you thought of it. And yeah, it reminded me why it's one of my absolute favorite books and will probably remain my absolute favorite Ray Bradbury book. I'll find out for sure as I'm working my way through all of his writings. But so far, of the ones that I've read and reread, this one still gets top billing. And I just genuinely hope that you've enjoyed it. I know that some of the others I think have been enjoying it as well. And I'm looking forward to December and starting in on the Iliad here very, very soon with you. So hope you're doing well, Shelly. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day.